When my daughter blocked me right after her wedding, I told myself she just needed time. But when I found out she was pregnant through a stranger's Facebook post and still hadn't told me, I realized time wasn't what she needed. She needed absence. I missed her graduation, her engagement dinner, and her wedding day, each one a silent punishment for choosing my career over presence. I thought I was building a future for her. She thought I was building a wall between us. Now, she's carrying a life I'll likely never meet, and I don't even know who the father is. 6 months ago, I stood outside her apartment in the rain, clutching a teddy bear and a handwritten note. The next morning, I found them both in the trash, soaked through, unwrapped. That was when I knew. I wasn't just late, I was erased. What followed will break your heart, challenge your definition of family, and make you question whether redemption ever truly comes. This isn't a story about forgiveness handed out like candy. It's about a man learning what it costs to show up too late, and the one moment that might just save him from being forgotten forever. Before we dive into this story of lost time, shattered trust, and one last chance to hold what's slipping away, hit that subscribe button and don't look away. Because the ending? You won't see it coming, and it might just heal a part of you too. My name is James Holloway, and at 58, I thought I had finally earned the right to slow down. I'd spent the last 3 decades in steel-toed boots, climbing oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, braving hurricanes, heat waves, and 15-hour shifts. People like to say there's honor in hard work. Maybe there is. But it doesn't feel like honor when you're eating Thanksgiving dinner from a plastic tray in the control room, 300 miles from home. I wasn't always like this. I used to be a soldier, 4 tours before I was 30. I met my wife, Elaine, between deployments, and for a while, I thought I'd finally found something worth staying grounded for. When she got pregnant with Eliza, I promised her I'd be different, that I'd be there. For 12 years, I tried. I coached Little League. I read bedtime stories over the phone when I couldn't get home. I remember her 7th birthday. She wanted a princess party, and I flew back early just to surprise her. Elaine caught me outside the bakery, trying to balance a dozen cupcakes and 2 balloons, and kissed me like I was the best man in the world. But life has a way of shifting the ground under your feet. Elaine was diagnosed with ovarian cancer the summer Eliza turned 12. By fall, she was gone. Just gone. No long goodbyes, no final words. One minute, we were talking about redecorating the kitchen, and the next, I was holding her hand in silence, pretending I still believed in miracles. After that, everything changed. I went back to work less than a month after the funeral. People thought I was being strong, pushing through the grief. The truth? I didn't know how to be home anymore. Every corner of that house smelled like her. Every silence echoed with the memory of what I'd lost. So I poured myself into the only thing I could still control: work. Promotions came. Paychecks got bigger. I started taking overseas contracts. 6 months in Dubai, 3 in Alaska, another in Norway. I told myself I was building a better life for Eliza. She had the best schools, the best clothes, a private college fund set by the time she hit 16. But presents? That I couldn't give. At first, she understood. Or at least she acted like she did. We'd FaceTime. I'd send her postcards from everywhere. But I missed her first high school play, then her junior prom, then graduation. I always had a reason, always had a deadline, always promised I'd make it up to her. She stopped asking around the time she turned 20. The last time we were truly close, I think, was when she broke her arm learning to skateboard. She was 13. I remember sleeping beside her hospital bed, holding her hand through the night. She whispered, "Don't leave again, Dad." I said, "I won't." I lied. I missed her college tour. I missed the day she got into Columbia. When she got engaged, I wired money for the ring. I didn't meet the guy. I told myself it wasn't necessary. I'd fly back for the wedding. Show up. Walk her down the aisle. Prove I was still her father in the ways that mattered. But I was on a rig off the coast of Venezuela when the email came. "Please don't come. You've missed too much already." I remember staring at the screen, thinking it was a joke, that she didn't mean it. I even laughed until I saw the read receipt on the wire transfer. She'd accepted the money, but not the man behind it. Still, I believed this was temporary. That time would soften her anger. That life, real life, would make her understand why I chose what I did. That she'd one day call, needing help, needing advice, needing me. I didn't know back then how wrong I was. The day Eliza graduated college, I was sitting in a boardroom in Houston, staring at a contract worth just over $1 million. We'd been negotiating with a firm from Abu Dhabi for weeks, and they'd flown in that morning to sign. I remember checking my watch every 15 minutes, knowing her name would be called around 11. She was valedictorian. I was supposed to be in the front row. I told myself there'd be other milestones, other speeches, other reasons to wear a suit and clap from the crowd. But deep down, I knew I had missed something I couldn't replicate with a check. That afternoon, I texted her, "So proud of you. Dinner on me next week?" She replied 4 hours later, "Thanks. I had hoped you'd be there." I read that line 3 times. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was quiet, like something in her had finally gone still. But I didn't stop. I kept working, kept flying, kept telling myself that one day she'd understand, that she'd be sitting at a boardroom table like me, faced with impossible choices and no room for sentiment. When she got engaged, I was on a 2-month assignment in Norway. She called me through a patchy signal to tell me, her voice trembling with a strange mix of joy and hesitance. I asked her his name. "Nathan," she said, and congratulated her. I offered to wire money for the ring. She said no at first, then paused, then said yes. That should have told me everything. I met Nathan once, briefly, over a video call I barely remember. I just landed in Houston and was half asleep in a hotel lobby. They held the phone up, smiling, waving. I nodded, said something generic about being happy for them, then hung up, promising we'd talk more soon. We never did. The wedding invitation came by mail 2 months later. Cream cardstock. Elegant. No mention of father of the bride. No seat reserved. I called to ask if she wanted me to walk her down the aisle. She paused. "It's probably better if you don't come, Dad." I thought she was joking. I laughed, until I realized she wasn't. She added, "You've missed the rest. No point starting now." I flew to Dubai that weekend, trying not to think about it. The day of her wedding, I watched the weather in New York online. Rain, 40% chance. I wondered if it hit during the vows. I wondered if she cried. I wondered if she looked around, hoping I'd show up anyway. I drank whiskey alone in a 5-star hotel overlooking a desert I didn't care about, convincing myself she'd come around. She always had. When she was 15 and angry, I missed her recital. She forgave me. When I skipped her first date night and she waited with a new dress I never saw, she eventually moved on. Why would this be any different? 2 weeks after the wedding, a package arrived at my home address in Texas. Inside, a handwritten letter, 4 pages long, folded into quarters. I knew it was from her. The slant of the handwriting, the careful spacing of the lines, it was unmistakable. I held it for days without opening it, left it on my nightstand, tucked it under a book. Sometimes I'd reach for it at night, fingers grazing the edge, then stop. I told myself, you don't need to read it. You know what it says. I didn't, and maybe that was the problem. I thought I understood her, thought I could predict her pain, her thoughts, her forgiveness, but I hadn't earned that kind of access in years. I left the letter sealed, packed it into a drawer, promised myself I'd read it when the time was right, when we'd mended enough for it to feel safe. That time never came. Instead, months passed. No calls, no texts, no holidays. I watched her life unfold through secondhand whispers from mutual friends and the occasional tagged photo. She looked happy, or at least content. I clung to that. I told myself, she's strong because of me. She learned to survive. But survival and love are not the same. I just couldn't see that yet. It started with a photo. I was scrolling through Facebook one night, half out of habit, half out of loneliness, when I saw it. A black and white image of a sonogram, grainy and unmistakable. It had no caption, just a date printed along the bottom edge and a single red heart in the comments. It was Eliza's profile. My heart stopped. She was pregnant. There was no tag, no mention of the father, no celebratory message. Just that image, quiet, private, and devastatingly clear. I stared at it for what felt like an hour, zooming in and out, reading the date over and over. Then I refreshed the page. The post was gone. I clicked on her profile. It was blank. She had blocked me. I sat there, stunned. The glow of the screen flickering against the cheap whiskey in my glass. I wasn't angry. I was numb. Like I'd just been handed a family photo and told I wasn't part of it anymore. The next morning, I made a decision I hadn't made in years. I got in my truck and drove 3 hours north to the last address I had for her, an apartment building in a clean part of Brooklyn. I hadn't seen it in person before. I used to send packages there, birthday cards, checks I told myself she never cashed. The front desk wouldn't let me up. Privacy policy, they said. So I left a note. Please call me. I saw the photo. I want to be here, for real this time. No call came. A week later, I tried the next step I could think of. The hospital. I didn't know which one, but I called a few. Eventually, a nurse recognized the name and said she'd recently come in for prenatal care. I drove there the same day, rehearsing what I'd say. When I arrived, I asked to see her, gave my name, told them I was her father. The nurse's face changed, subtle, but enough. I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Holloway has requested no contact with you. I blinked. I just want to know she's okay. She hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Her voice softened. She told us to say she doesn't have a father. Those words hit harder than any I'd ever heard in combat, in business, or in loss. I felt my legs go weak, like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. I stood there for a long time, unsure of what to do. Security didn't escort me out. No one yelled. But I left anyway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. In the parking lot, I sat motionless for nearly half an hour. I kept thinking about that photo. the tiny outline of a life forming, my grandchild, someone I might never know. I don't remember crying. I wish I had. I think I was too afraid to feel anything too deeply. Because feeling meant acknowledging the truth. I had become a stranger to my own blood. As I opened my car door to leave, a voice stopped me. "You're her dad?" I turned. A young doctor, early 30s, stethoscope slung around his neck, stood nearby, holding a clipboard. He looked at me for a moment, then stepped closer. "I probably shouldn't say this," he said, glancing over his shoulder, "but she told one of the nurses, the last time you promised to come, you didn't." I opened my mouth, then closed it. "She waited," he added quietly. "Thought maybe you'd show up at the wedding, or the funeral." "Funeral?" I asked, startled. He winced. "Sorry, I meant wedding." But the slip stayed with me. I nodded, thanked him, and got in the truck. On the drive home, I couldn't stop replaying those words. She doesn't have a father. What haunted me wasn't just the rejection. It was the finality of it, the certainty. It was as if, in her mind, I'd already died. I bought the apartment 6 blocks from Eliza's place. It was a quiet building, with brick siding and a crooked mailbox, nestled between a coffee shop and a bookstore I never entered. The realtor asked if I wanted to see anything closer to Central Park, maybe something more suited for retirement. I told her no. I didn't say it out loud, but the truth was, I didn't buy the place for me. I bought it for proximity. I told myself that if I lived nearby, just nearby, she might bump into me someday. At the grocery store, at the pharmacy. Maybe she'd be walking her dog, if she had one. And I'd be there, casually picking out apples like a man who wasn't desperate. It was the most expensive hope I'd ever purchased. The first few weeks, I spent my mornings walking. I traced a 6-block loop past her building, memorizing which windows lit up at what time. I never stopped, never lingered. Just walked by like a stranger who didn't know what he was looking for. One Saturday morning, it happened. I saw her. She was coming out of the bakery on the corner, a brown paper bag in one hand, the other resting on her small, growing belly. She looked healthy, radiant even. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, her face calm, unreadable. She was alone. I froze. My instinct was to call out, wave, run to her, and say everything I'd been rehearsing for months. But my feet didn't move. My throat tightened. Instead, I did something shameful. I turned and followed her. Not closely, not dangerously, just enough to feel like I still belonged to her orbit. She walked slowly, stopping once to tie her shoe, once more to read a flyer on a lamppost. I stayed a safe distance back, pretending to window shop, crossing the street when she paused too long. When she disappeared into her building, I stood across the street and waited until the lights came on in her apartment. Then I walked home. That became a pattern. I never saw her again up close, but I saw enough to know she was okay. She still shopped at the same grocery store, visited the same corner cafe. Sometimes I saw her from afar, laughing with a friend or resting on a bench. I never got close. I never made a sound. I told myself this was enough, that I was respecting her wishes by not interfering. That just being nearby was better than pushing her further away. But the truth was, I was hiding, not from her, but from the shame. The shame of being a father who had become a spectator in his daughter's life. The shame of knowing that if something happened to her, I'd be the last to know. The shame of pretending I still had a role to play when I hadn't earned a single line in the script. I started making excuses to stay in the neighborhood, volunteering at the community center, taking cooking classes I didn't care about. I even tried yoga once, thinking she might show up. She never did. People at the center began to know my name. A few called me Mr. H. They said I was kind, thoughtful, reliable. The irony didn't escape me. There, among strangers, I was dependable. But to the one person who mattered, I was a ghost. I began journaling at night. Pages and pages of letters I'd never send. Some started with, "Dear Eliza." Others just poured out like confessions. I wrote about her mother, about the day she was born, about the times I chose money over memories, and why I thought I was doing the right thing. Some nights, I cried without making a sound. I was afraid if I let myself sob, the building walls would echo with proof of what I'd become. A man with no one to answer to, and no one who answered back. It came in a manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from upstate New York. I almost threw it away. I thought it was junk, some local real estate offer or alumni donation request. But when I tore it open, a smaller envelope slid out with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Elaine's friend, Marie. She had been one of the few people who stuck around after Elaine passed. The kind who sent Christmas cards even when you didn't respond. The kind who showed up at the funeral with a casserole and tears that matched your own. Inside her note, a single line. I thought you should read this. Eliza never sent it, but she meant every word. Folded around it was a letter 4 pages thick, dated just a week after Eliza's wedding. The envelope hadn't even been sealed. She must have written it, maybe rewrote it a few times, then left it sitting somewhere, waiting for the right moment that never came. At the top, in red ink, "If you ever care, don't come back." My hands shook. I sat at the kitchen table, light leaking through half-closed blinds, and read. "Dad, I don't know what this letter is for. Maybe it's goodbye. Maybe it's just the only way I'll ever say everything I've swallowed. But you need to hear it, even if you don't want to. I begged you to be there. I begged you to show up, not with money, not with promises, but with your actual body, your voice, your eyes. You always chose oil over blood, every time. And I learned not to need you, because it hurt too much to want you." On my graduation day, I scanned the crowd until my eyes hurt. I told myself, "You were running late." I smiled through the speech, while my heart cracked. When Nathan asked for my hand, I prayed you'd fly home and ask who he was. You didn't. You just wired money like a stranger paying off a debt. So no, I didn't want you at the wedding, because you hadn't earned the aisle. I paused, unable to breathe. The rest of the letter blurred before I forced myself to keep reading. You used to tell me stories about storms, how the sea teaches you to respect silence, how oil rigs creak like giants. You said work kept you sane. But I needed a father more than you needed to feel useful. Mom died trying to make space for you in my heart. She left behind a girl who thought her father was a hero, but you became an echo, something we listened for but never heard again. If you read this and feel sorry, don't. Sorry is another ghost word. I need change. I need peace. And I can't find it in someone who only shows up after everything's already broken. So if you ever care, don't come back. Because that would mean you care now, not when it mattered. By the time I finished, I was crying. Not the kind of tears that slide down silently. These came out of nowhere, hard, heaving, ugly sobs. The kind I hadn't let out since Elaine's funeral. When I locked myself in the bedroom after everyone left and punched the closet door until my knuckles bled, I hadn't cried for Eliza. Not properly. Not when she blocked me. Not when I saw the sonogram. Not even when the nurse said, "She told us she has no father." But this broke me, because for the first time, I didn't hear her as my child. I heard her as a woman who had spent years trying to shrink her pain so I wouldn't feel guilty. A woman who stopped waiting because the waiting was killing her. A woman who finally said the words I had refused to say to myself, "You weren't there." I stayed at that table until the light outside turned gold and then dark. I read the letter again and again. Every time it cut deeper. Every time it showed me parts of her I had missed while I was off being useful. I thought about calling Marie, about asking her if Eliza knew she sent it. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. She hadn't sent the letter, because somewhere inside, she still hoped I'd prove it wrong. And all I'd done was prove it right. The day I walked into the community center and asked to volunteer, I didn't have a plan. I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't even looking for hope. I just needed a place to go, where I wasn't haunted by the echo of 4 pages folded into a letter I never deserved to read. The director was a woman named Tanya, early 40s, with sharp eyes and a voice that had clearly told a lot of men to sit down and listen. She asked why I was there. I told her I wanted to help. She raised an eyebrow. "Retired?" "Sort of," I said. She scanned me up and down, like she was deciding whether I was a creep or a broken man. "Maybe both." "You good with tools?" "Better with listening," I replied. That got me in. I started small, stacking diapers, organizing donation bins, fixing shelves that leaned the wrong way. Eventually, I began talking to the women. Not deeply, not about trauma or abuse or abandonment, just simple things. "Do you need a ride? Want me to hold the baby while you eat?" They called me Mr. James. Some asked if I had grandkids. I always hesitated. Then one afternoon, I was sorting baby formula in the back room when I overheard 2 staff members talking in the hallway. One mentioned a girl who had come in months earlier, alone, pregnant, in shock. She didn't stay long, one said. Didn't even give her real name at first. My ears perked. "What happened?" "Lost one of the twins," the other answered, voice low. "Stress-related, they think. She collapsed at work, said she had no one." I stepped out from behind the shelf like I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. "You know her name?" I asked, too quickly. They looked up, startled. One of them, a young nurse with braided hair and tired eyes, tilted her head. "Why?" "I think I might know her," I said. She studied me for a second, then nodded slowly. "Eliza Holloway." The room spun. "She came here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "She was here for maybe 2 hours. Didn't want to talk. Just sat with a blanket around her shoulders, rocking back and forth. Didn't cry. Didn't ask for help. But she said something I still remember. I braced myself. She said, 'I was screaming for my dad. He never came.' I don't remember leaving the building. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting in my dark living room, hands gripping my knees, feeling like someone had hollowed out my chest with a shovel. A twin. She had been carrying twins, and she lost one because of stress, because she was alone, because I wasn't there. It wasn't just the tragedy that gutted me. It was the image of her, wrapped in a blanket, silenced by grief, and still waiting, still hoping, still calling for a man who had taught her over and over that hope was a wasted currency. I thought about the hospital. The nurse who told me she had requested no contact. The doctor who slipped and said funeral instead of wedding. Had he meant this? Had he meant the funeral for the child who never had a name? I couldn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk and wrote another letter. Not to Eliza, to the child she lost. I didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. Didn't know if they had a name, a heartbeat, a face in a framed sonogram. But I wrote anyway. I'm sorry I wasn't there, I wrote. I would have held your hand if I could have. I would have told you stories about your grandmother. I would have been your grandfather, if only someone had called me. And then, halfway through the letter, I stopped writing. Because someone had. She had. And I hadn't listened. I bought the teddy bear from a boutique near the community center. A small handmade thing with stitched eyes and a red ribbon tied around its neck. I wasn't sure why I chose it. Maybe because it looked like something Eliza might have loved as a child. Or maybe because I needed something soft to carry what I couldn't say. I placed it carefully in a box along with a handwritten letter. The letter took me 4 nights to write. I rewrote each line more than once. I kept it simple, honest. I don't know how to fix what I broke, I wrote, but I want to try. Even if you never forgive me, I need you to know that I'm here now. For real, for good. I left the box on her doorstep early one morning before the sun came up. I didn't knock, just walked away and hoped. 3 days passed. No reply. Then the box came back, mailed this time, same contents inside, unopened. A return to sender sticker slapped across my handwriting like a rejection letter from a college I had never applied to. I didn't cry. Instead, I drove to the post office to confirm it hadn't been a mistake. The clerk looked at me with practiced neutrality and said, "Recipient refused delivery." The next day was her birthday. I bought a simple card, no flowers, no gifts, just a card with a note inside, wishing you peace wherever you are. That night, the rain came down hard, one of those New York storms that makes the whole city feel like it's holding its breath. I was walking past her street. Yes, I still did that, when I saw her. She stepped out of her building, wearing an oversized hoodie, her hair tied back. She was holding something in her hand. The envelope. My card. She walked to the corner trash can, looked down at it for a moment, then dropped it in like it was nothing. She didn't even hesitate. I stood frozen under a street lamp, water soaking through my jacket, watching as she turned and went back inside without once looking up. That should have been it. That should have been enough humiliation for one lifetime. But I went to the trash can anyway, reached in and pulled it out. The card was soggy, ink bleeding down the paper like veins. My words had blurred to something illegible, like time itself had washed them away. I kept it anyway, tucked it inside my coat, and walked home like a man carrying his own obituary. 2 days later, I saw her again, this time at the market. It was a coincidence, pure chance. She was in the produce aisle, holding a bag of oranges. I almost walked away, almost turned around and left the store entirely. But I didn't. I stepped forward, carefully, slowly. "Eliza," I said softly. She turned. Her eyes landed on me, and in that second, I saw everything I'd ruined. The wall between us, the ache she carried like a second spine. "What are you doing here?" she asked flatly. "I didn't know you'd be here," I said. You were just stalking me again?" she cut in. "Watching from across streets? Leaving things I didn't ask for?" "No," I said. "I was just trying to show you I care. Her voice cracked, just slightly, but her eyes didn't. You don't get to show up now and pretend to be my hero, she said. You don't get to sweep in like this is some third act redemption arc. I'm not trying to be a hero, I whispered. I just want to be your father. She blinked. Then you should have been there when I needed one. She walked past me, leaving the bag of oranges on the shelf, her shoulders stiff with something that looked a lot like rage or grief. I didn't follow. The morning it happened, I was standing at the sink, rinsing out a coffee mug I never used. I kept a set of dishes clean out of habit, not necessity. No one visited. No one came by. I didn't expect them to. My phone had been silent for days, aside from the occasional community center reminder or pharmacy notification. I remember gripping the edge of the counter because the room had started tilting like a slow, clumsy boat. Then the right side of my face went numb. I reached for the phone and missed it completely, knocking it to the floor. My knees buckled. I hit the linoleum hard. The last thing I saw before everything turned sideways was a crack in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before, spidering out like the veins in my hands. When I woke up, everything was white and humming. Machines beeped in rhythm, and my throat felt raw. A nurse with kind eyes leaned over and said, "Mr. Holloway, can you hear me?" I nodded, or tried to. "You had a minor stroke," she said gently. "You're going to be okay." They said I'd been found by a maintenance man who heard a thud and used the building's spare key to enter. He'd called 911. If he'd come 10 minutes later, things might have been different. I lay in that hospital bed for 2 nights, alone. No calls, no visitors. I didn't expect any. On the second night, I dreamed of Elaine. She was sitting at the edge of the bed, dressed in the same blue sweater she wore the day we buried her mother. Her hair was tied back, like always, and her hands were folded in her lap. She didn't smile. "You're still late, James," she said. "Always late." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't open. My body was frozen, like I'd turned to stone. She shook her head. "She waited for you. Through everything. You left both of us. Over and over. You thought providing was love. But you forgot the part that mattered most." I wanted to scream, to apologize, to explain, but she faded before I could say a word, dissolving into the hospital's fluorescent ceiling tiles. When I woke up, I was crying. The nurse asked if I was in pain. I told her no. I didn't have the language to describe what was hurting. Back home, the apartment felt colder. The light through the windows looked paler. I moved slower, not just from the stroke, but from something deeper, an internal fracture no doctor could diagnose. I spent most of the next week in bed. I didn't shave, didn't cook. I replayed that dream over and over in my head. Elaine's voice, her disappointment, the weight of every missed moment compacting into one unbearable truth. I had become exactly what I feared most, forgettable. I tried to distract myself. TV, books, music, but everything felt hollow. I couldn't even bring myself to walk past Eliza's building anymore. It felt wrong, like I was polluting her peace with my presence. One night, I opened a box of old photos, wedding shots, birthday parties, Eliza in pigtails grinning with cake on her face. In one picture, I was holding her high above my head, both of us laughing. Elaine had captured it on a disposable camera during a beach trip I'd forgotten. I stared at that photo for hours. Then I tore it in half. Not out of anger, but because I couldn't recognize the man in it anymore. I didn't believe in him. He was a ghost, and I had become something worse, someone the living tried to forget. When Tanya from the community center called to ask why I hadn't shown up for the last few shifts, I lied and said I'd been out of town. She offered to bring me groceries. I declined. She paused and said, "You know, people around here care about you." I said thanks, but I didn't believe her. Because the one person I needed to care didn't even want me breathing the same air. I woke on the 7th morning back home with a clarity I hadn't known in years. It wasn't dramatic. No burst of music, no sudden flood of motivation. Just a stillness, a quiet acceptance. For the first time, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check her building from the window. I didn't think about letters or cards or stuffed bears. I thought about dignity, mine, hers. I realized I couldn't ask for forgiveness anymore. Not because I didn't want it, but because I no longer believed I deserved it. And maybe that was the key. Finally living as though there was nothing left to earn, only right things left to do. I spent the afternoon going through my financials. Decades of savings, retirement accounts, old military pensions, oil bonuses. Money I'd once thought would pay for Eliza's house, her child's education, her every birthday present I'd missed. That door was closed, but maybe someone else needed it. At the community center, I scheduled a meeting with Tanya. I told her I wanted to fund something. Quietly, no plaque, no recognition, just money where it was needed. She leaned back in her chair and eyed me suspiciously. "What's the catch?" "No catch," I said. "I want to set up a grant for single mothers, women who slipped through cracks, the ones who don't ask anymore." Tanya narrowed her eyes. "In her name?" I shook my head. "In no one's name." We structured it that week. I transferred the funds and kept it off every public record I could. No announcements, no board meetings, just a silent ledger and a promise that I would never pick who received it. I didn't want to know. But the universe had other plans. 2 weeks later, I was restocking shelves at the center when Tanya pulled me aside. "You said no updates," she said. "But I think you'll want to hear this." I braced myself. One of the recipients came in today. First one, actually. Early approval because of her situation. I nodded slowly. She didn't know who funded it, of course, but she cried when we handed her the envelope, said it was the first good thing that had happened in months. I smiled faintly. "That's good." "She's pregnant," Tanya added. "Lost one of the twins earlier this year." The air thinned. "She didn't say much else," Tanya continued, "but she looked familiar." I went back to our intake notes from before. Same handwriting, same emergency contact. Blank. I felt my body tighten. "Eliza Holloway," Tanya said. "That's your daughter, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "She doesn't know?" Tanya asked. "No," I said, "and she never should." Tanya leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "Why?" "Because I didn't do it for her," I replied. "I did it for me. For every time I said I cared, but didn't show up. For every dollar I threw at a moment instead of standing in it." Tanya didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "She's coming back next week to pick up the second installment." I nodded, my throat tight. "Will you be here?" she asked. "No," I said. "She doesn't need that. She just needs the help." That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same place I'd read her unsent letter weeks earlier. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just breathed. It was the first time I felt something close to peace. Not because I was forgiven, but because for once, I'd done something right without asking anything in return. And somehow, in a city of millions, a man she'd spent years trying to forget had still managed to be useful to her. Silently, anonymously, fully. It wasn't redemption, but it was enough. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those rare autumn days when New York feels almost kind. The air was crisp, not biting. The wind gentle. I had just finished a shift at the community center, restocking formula, fixing a squeaky door in the nursery, and decided to walk the long way home. I wasn't thinking about her, not consciously. I had stopped planning routes around the possibility of seeing Eliza. I told myself I was past that now. I had done what I could, left behind what I needed to. But fate doesn't care about your timing. I was passing the corner of 9th and Waverly halfway through the crosswalk when I heard it, a loud thud followed by gasps. Someone had collapsed on the sidewalk ahead. A crowd started forming. I moved instinctively, weaving through people, heart already pounding. And then I saw her, Eliza. She was crumpled on the ground, her head resting awkwardly against a bus stop pole. One hand clutched her stomach. Her face was pale, too pale. Her lips had lost all color. For a second, I couldn't move. Then everything kicked in at once. I dropped to my knees beside her, checked her breathing, shallow but steady, and shouted for someone to call 911. A woman said she already had. A man handed me his jacket to tuck beneath her head. I stayed with her, my hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You're okay. You're okay, baby. Stay with me." She didn't respond. When the ambulance arrived, I followed without hesitation. The paramedics started to protest, but I said, "I'm her father." It was the first time I'd said it out loud in months. They didn't question me. At the hospital, I paced outside the exam room like a caged animal. A nurse asked if I wanted coffee. I shook my head. The minutes dragged. Finally, a doctor came out. "She's stable," he said. "Dehydrated. Low blood pressure. But the baby's okay. She's lucky someone got to her quickly." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "She's awake now. You can go in, if she's okay with that." I hesitated. "Can you ask her?" He nodded and disappeared through the door. 30 seconds later, he returned and held it open. She said yes. I stepped inside slowly. Eliza was propped up in bed, pale but conscious, IV line trailing from her arm. Her eyes met mine immediately. There was no warmth there, no welcome. But there wasn't anger either, just confusion. She didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Then softly, she asked, "I didn't call you. Why did you come?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just tired, worn. I took a breath. "Because you're still my child," I said, "even if I failed you." She stared at me for a long time, eyes searching my face for something. Maybe proof that I meant it. Maybe a reason to believe me. "Do you know how many times I cried for you?" she asked, voice cracking. "When I lost the other baby? When I couldn't sleep at night because I was scared I'd lose this one too? I wanted you. I hated you. I needed you." I felt tears press at the corners of my eyes. I didn't wipe them away. "I know," I said. "And I wasn't there. I didn't deserve to be." "You still don't?" she whispered. I nodded. She looked away, staring at the window where city lights blinked like distant stars. "I'm not saying this changes anything," she said. "You showing up now doesn't fix what you didn't show up for." "I know," I repeated. "But," she added, almost inaudibly, "thank you for being there today." I didn't move closer, didn't reach for her hand. stayed exactly where I was, still, grounded, trying not to shatter under the weight of that single inch she'd given me. When the nurse returned and said visiting hours were up, I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. "I'm not here to be a hero," I said without turning around. "I'm just here, if you ever want that." She didn't respond, but she didn't ask me to leave and never come back either. And for now, that was enough. The first time she let me inside her apartment, it was because of a leaky faucet. She didn't call me, not directly, but when I saw her at the community center, picking up a fresh pack of vitamins from Tanya, she sighed and said, "Do you know anything about plumbing?" "Enough to stop a flood," I replied carefully. She didn't smile, but she didn't say no either. That afternoon, I stood in her small kitchen, crouched under the sink, tightening a worn-out valve. She hovered nearby, arms crossed, watching every move like a tenant unsure whether to trust the landlord again. We didn't talk much, just surface-level conversation. How far along she was, what the doctor had said last week, how the baby kicked at night. I didn't ask personal questions. I didn't try to pry. I just listened. She let me come back a few days later, this time to assemble a crib. She had ordered one online, but the instructions were a mess, and the pieces sprawled across the floor like the ruins of some modern temple. I brought my tools, sat cross-legged, and worked in silence. She offered tea, then sat across the room with swollen ankles propped on a pillow, occasionally glancing up from her book to make sure I wasn't putting the mattress in upside down. This continued for weeks, fixing curtain rods, hanging shelves, lifting groceries when she came back from appointments. Always useful, always quiet. Until one night, when a thunderstorm rolled over Brooklyn and knocked the power out. I was in her apartment, helping install a baby monitor. The lights flickered, then died, and the city went soft and blue through the windows. I reached for my flashlight, but she stopped me. "Leave it off," she said. We sat in the dark, the storm crackling like old vinyl in the distance. For a while, the only sound was the rain tapping the glass. Then she asked, "Do you remember the night Mom died?" I looked at her, surprised. "Of course." "I don't," she said. "Not really, just pieces." I nodded slowly. "She didn't want you in the hospital," Eliza continued, at the end. "You stayed in the hallway, right?" I swallowed. "Yes." "Why?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because I had never said it out loud. "She was hooked to too many machines," I said finally. "Tubes, wires. She didn't look like herself, and I couldn't watch her slip away like that. Not again." "Again?" "My father died in a VA hospital," I explained. "Same thing. Beeps and breathing masks, cold metal railings. I held his hand until it went limp, and I swore I'd never see death like that again." She didn't speak. "I stayed in the hallway because I was a coward," I said, "because if I walked in and saw her face, I knew I'd break." The thunder cracked louder outside. She pulled her knees up to her chest. "I used to think you just didn't care," she whispered. "I cared too much," I said. "So much it paralyzed me." There was a long pause, then barely audible, "So you were scared too?" I turned toward her. She wasn't looking at me, just staring at the window, rain tracing lines down the glass. "I didn't know that," she added. "I thought you were just gone." "I was," I said, "in every way that mattered." She nodded slowly. The lights came back on a few minutes later, humming softly to life. The silence between us didn't break. just settled differently. Not heavy, not hostile, just honest. I gathered my tools and stood to leave. At the door, she stopped me. "Same time next week?" she asked. "For what?" "I don't know," she said, shrugging. "Something will probably break." I smiled. "I'll be here." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a start. The clinic was warmer than usual that morning. The heating must have been turned up higher for the winter chill, and the waiting room buzzed with muffled conversations and the sound of heels tapping against tile. I sat beside Eliza, pretending to read a magazine while she filled out her paperwork. She hadn't asked me to come, not directly. But when she said, "I have another appointment Tuesday," and left the sentence hanging, I offered to drive her. She didn't say yes. She just said what time she'd be ready. In this new version of our relationship, that counted as progress. She handed the clipboard to the receptionist and glanced at me briefly. I gave a small nod, and she returned to her seat. We didn't talk much in public. She was cautious, guarded, like any sign of familiarity might shatter the fragile truce we were building. But she didn't tell me to leave. After a few minutes, a nurse stepped into the room and called her name. "Eliza Holloway?" She stood, and I made to rise too, but paused. She looked back. "You can come?" she said, voice low. Inside the exam room, the doctor greeted us with that practiced calm all obstetricians seem to master. He asked about her sleep, her appetite, movement from the baby. She answered everything clearly, confidently. Then, as he glanced over her chart, he asked almost casually, "And who's going to be with you during delivery?" Eliza blinked. Her hand went still on the swell of her stomach. The room went quiet for just a beat too long. Then slowly, she looked at me. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just watched her, trying not to hold my breath. "If he still wants to," she began, then paused. "Maybe my dad." I wasn't sure I heard it right. The doctor nodded and jotted something down, not grasping the weight of what she'd just said. But I did. Eliza didn't look at me again. She turned back to the monitor as the doctor prepped the ultrasound. I stayed silent, trying to ignore the sting behind my eyes. Later, in the car, the silence returned. Comfortable this time, almost peaceful. She stared out the window, one hand resting protectively on her stomach, the other tugging lightly at the seatbelt. "You don't have to say yes," she said, out of nowhere. "About the delivery, I just figured I should ask before someone else did." I didn't respond right away. I was afraid if I did, my voice would crack. "I do want to," I said finally. She nodded once, slowly. I kept my eyes on the road. We didn't need more than that. The next few days passed in a strange calm. I began preparing myself, not just for the hospital, but for what it would mean to be there, to witness something so raw, so irreversible, to hold her hand through the moment life began again for her, and maybe for me too. I bought books on labor coaching, read articles, watched videos. Every step felt like walking into a room I'd been locked out of for years. One afternoon, I stopped by her apartment with a bag of groceries and found her sitting on the floor, sorting baby clothes into tiny piles. "Color-coded?" I asked. "Sort of," she said. "Onesies that actually fit. Onesies I'm emotionally attached to, and onesies from people I don't like." I laughed, a real one. She smirked. I sat beside her, carefully folding a yellow sleeper. "Why now?" she asked suddenly. "What do you mean? Why are you here now, when you weren't there before?" I considered the question, then answered, with what felt truest. Because now, I understand what I lost, and because this time, I want to be someone you can count on, not someone you wish hadn't shown up. She didn't reply, but her expression softened. That night, as I walked home, snow had begun to fall. Light at first, barely dusting the sidewalks. I looked up and let the flakes settle on my cheeks, cold and sharp. I didn't feel forgiven, but I felt trusted, and that was a beginning. The hospital room was dimly lit, washed in a soft, sterile glow from the overhead fixtures. Machines beeped rhythmically. Nurses moved efficiently, their voices low, clipped, professional. But in the corner of it all, time slowed. I sat beside Eliza, holding her hand, our fingers interlocked so tightly it felt like if we let go, we'd fall apart. She was drenched in sweat, her face pale, but determined. Every breath came ragged, controlled. She had never looked more powerful or more vulnerable. A nurse wiped her brow and offered quiet encouragement. The doctor gave calm, precise instructions. I just stayed still, trying to be the rock I never was when she was a child. "You're doing great," I whispered. She didn't speak, but she squeezed my hand hard enough to let me know she heard. I remembered the moment she was born, Eliza, how I stood in the delivery room with Elaine, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of it, how I cried without shame, without reserve. It had felt like the start of something pure, something permanent. And now I was here again, on the edge of a beginning I didn't deserve, but one I was finally ready for. "Okay, Eliza," the doctor said gently. "One more push." She screamed, not from fear, not from weakness, but from the force of becoming. And then, the sound, a high-pitched, urgent cry, as bright and sharp as breaking glass. The baby's cry, the first sound of a brand new soul entering the world. I felt her hand tremble in mine. She looked at me, tears pouring freely now, her chest heaving with exhausted relief. "She's yours too," she whispered, voice shaking. I couldn't answer. I leaned forward and kissed her forehead, then stood to see the nurse swaddle the newborn in a white blanket. A tiny red face peeked out, eyes scrunched tight, fingers twitching. They handed her to Eliza first. She looked down at her daughter, my granddaughter, and smiled through tears. Then she turned to me. "Do you want to hold her?" I nodded, speechless. She passed the baby into my arms, and the world collapsed into that weight. 7 pounds, maybe 8, but heavier than anything I'd carried in a lifetime. Heavier than guilt, than time, than regret. I looked down at the child and saw everything I'd almost lost. The chance to love without distance, to show up without condition, to be the man I should have been all along. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused, and I whispered, "Hi, sweetheart. I'm your grandpa." The room disappeared for a moment. Just the three of us, Eliza, the baby, and me. 2 generations learning to forgive, one just beginning. A nurse moved quietly in the background, checking monitors. The doctor smiled faintly, scribbling notes, but none of that mattered. Not then. I sat beside Eliza again, still holding the baby. She looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "Thank you," she said. I shook my head. "No, thank you for letting me be here." She leaned back, eyelids drooping with fatigue, and said, "You didn't miss this one." And I knew, in that moment, the path to redemption didn't need an apology. It needed presence. 6 months later, I sat in front of an old webcam, adjusting the angle until my tired face fit the frame. My granddaughter, now chubby and endlessly curious, was napping 2 rooms away. Eliza was out picking up groceries, trusting me, to watch over the most fragile thing in her world. I stared into the lens and hit record. I didn't write a script, didn't plan anything clever or polished. I just talked. "My name is James Holloway," I began, "and I wasn't a good father." I spoke plainly, like I would to a friend, or maybe to the version of myself 20 years younger. The one who thought wiring money replaced showing up. The one who believed being busy was the same as being responsible. I told the truth. How I missed her graduation, her wedding. How I read a letter she never sent that broke me in places I didn't know could still crack. I talked about the hospital, about how I almost died alone, about the day I decided not to ask for forgiveness anymore, but to live in a way that made it irrelevant. I explained the grant, the silent gesture, the way fate laughed and made her the first recipient. And I described the moment, my moment, when I held her baby for the first time and felt something mend. I didn't blame her. I didn't ask for sympathy. I just told the story. When I was done, I paused, let the silence stretch, then looked into the camera one last time. "I missed the most important days of her life," I said quietly, "but maybe, just maybe, I was on time for the first day of her daughter's." Then I clicked upload. I didn't expect anyone to watch it. I didn't even name the file anything dramatic. Just for Eliza. But by the next morning, the view count had passed 20,000. By the end of the week, it had reached 1 million. People shared it not because I was anyone special, but because the story was, because it was theirs too, in different shapes, with different names, but the same ache, the same longing, the same hope that maybe it's not too late. Messages poured in, from sons, from daughters, from fathers who hadn't spoken to their kids in decades, from kids who had written off their parents and suddenly found a crack in the wall. One woman wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to call my dad. We talked for the first time in 12 years. Another said, "I never knew how to forgive my father until I saw your face." But the one that stopped me cold was from a man in Florida. "Your video made me put down the bottle and pick up the phone." I never replied to any of them. Instead, I printed each message and put them in a shoebox labeled "Not Too Late." One afternoon, Eliza found the box. She opened it, flipped through a few, and asked, "You kept all of these?" I nodded. "They're not about me," I said. "They're about what comes after." She closed the lid gently. We didn't need to say more. Later that night, I rocked my granddaughter to sleep, humming the same off-key lullaby I once sang to Eliza when she broke her arm and couldn't fall asleep. As I watched her tiny chest rise and fall, I whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if I'm coming back." Because this time, I was already here.